Welcome. This is another study, the fifth study in our series, Loving God with All of Our Strength, which forms part of a greater study in spiritual transformation through loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so far in this series of studies, we've seen that to love God with all of our strength means to love Him for who He is and not just for what He gives us. And if we love Him for who He is, then we'll want to be like Him. If we want to be like Him, we'll want to love like He loves unconditionally. So when we learn to love unconditionally, we're learning to love as God loves and learning to love God Himself. And most recently, we talked about discovering practice, how to learn what to look for and where to look for it, what to see that we've never seen before, to know when to practice love towards others. And now we'd like to talk about training ourselves to be consistent in that practice. And so this study today will be called Training to Love as the Father Loves. And training in the Christian life brings to mind a passage that Paul wrote to the Corinthian Christians in Greece in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 to 27. In this passage, he compares the Christian life to running a race. And of course, Paul was writing to Greeks, Christians who were Greeks, who knew about the Olympic Games that had been established centuries before Paul wrote this. They were acquainted with the training of runners, and now they could compare the life of a runner to the life of a Christian, according to what Paul says in this passage. Let's read together in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 to 27. He says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." What exactly do we mean by training? He says that everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. Well, training for a runner, of course, involves doing exercises and runs that gradually increase his or her ability to run, their speed to run, and their endurance to run long distance. And in that training, they are presented with more challenging exercises, more challenging runs that increase their ability, slowly but surely, to run faster and to run longer. And in the Christian life, if we're learning to love like the Father loves, then we want to increase, for instance, our ability to see opportunities, our ability to focus, the ability to avoid distractions, to overcome hurdles and challenges, and finally to make loving unconditionally, a way of life for us. So running. We want to run. We want to run in the Christian life, run to show compassion, run to show mercy to people, run to show humility. Because, in fact, our Father ran. Do you remember the parable of the lost son in the scene where the son returns to the father? And when the father sees him, the father runs to him to embrace him, to forgive him, and show compassion. Because his son was suffering from guilt and the shame of having left home and made lots of mistakes. He ran to forgive him. And of course, the father in the parable represents God, our Heavenly Father, and how He runs to forgive us. If He runs to love, we want to learn to run to love too. And that's why we train. Runners have a goal in mind. Of course, they know they have to choose, for instance, what kind of race they want to run, if they want to run long distance or short distance, sprints, if they want to run on the road, if they want to run on paths in the forest. They have to decide what kind of goal they'd like to achieve through their running. and then they train for that goal. We have a goal too, and that goal is our spiritual transformation by learning to love like our Father does. In fact, in 1 John, remember 1 John chapter 4, verse 16, where John says, God is love, and those who live in love live in God and God in them. That expresses our goal. Our goal is to live in love. Living in love is consistent practice. It's our way of living. It's what we live for and how we live. God is love. And the closest we can come to becoming love, like He is love, is by living in it, becoming consistent in our practice. That's our goal. To reach that goal, we have to do certain kinds of training that will help us achieve it. And we'd like to think about several ways to train to learn to love. First of all, we've got to spend lots of time with the teachings of Jesus. Like we said last time in Discovering Practice, Jesus is our guide. He's our coach. He's the one that trains us because He's the one who can teach us where to look for opportunities to love and what to see that we've never seen before. Runners need a coach. They need someone to guide them, to teach them how to run, how to pace themselves, how to breathe, what kind of posture to have while they're running, when to sprint and when to jog. Coaches that can you present them with challenges that are difficult to meet, but will increase their ability. That's what coaches do. That's what Jesus does for us. So we want to learn to spend time in His teachings, immerse ourselves in His words. Spend time with it so that you don't just read His word, but you drink it in and imagine how you would practice what He's doing. He's teaching in His parables and His principles and even in His conversations with people ways to show mercy, compassion, forgiveness, patience. He's showing us what it means to be humble to people. He's teaching us how to run in the Christian life. And when we take that into our own hearts and imagine how to practice it, then we can begin our run too in the Christian life. Let's take an example, a very simple example to begin with. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 41, Jesus taught what we can call the principle of the second mile. He said, in very brief words, if anyone forces you to go a mile with them, go 2 miles. And that principle is based apparently on something that was part of history at that point. The Christians were under the Roman government, living under the Roman government, and there was some kind of civil law, civil rule that allowed for soldiers who were marching to a distant place to do battle, that they could obligate someone standing along the road someplace to carry their pack and their equipment for a mile so they could rest. And the Roman roads even had mile markers on them so you would know exactly when you have walked a mile carrying the soldier's pack and equipment. It would give the soldier a chance to rest while he's marching to this distant place. And so Jesus says, if someone obligates you to go a mile with them, go 2. But why? Why go beyond that obligation? Well, of course, when you do something, an act of kindness like that, out of an obligation, it's not really unconditional because you're under the obligation. And you may sincerely enjoy doing it for the person because you want to be kind to people, but you're still under obligation. How would you prove your sincerity? How would you prove that you're willing to love unconditionally? By going the second mile. That's not obligated. By doing more than you're asked to do. And even helping when you're not even asked to help. That's going the second mile. So He's not just teaching us what to do in the case of soldiers asking us to carry a burden. He's teaching us how to love unconditionally by going farther than people ask us to go with them, to assure them that we are sincerely wanting to love them, to take care of them, to help them with their needs, to be kind. So we spend time with that teaching. You could get up in the morning and think about the second mile principle. As you're planning your day, you could imagine moments where you might go the second mile with people you work with or friends at school to help them. Someone asks you to help them with a math problem, and you go the second mile and help them with other problems too they have. And then in the evening, when you get back, you might review your day and think about how you applied this teaching of Jesus. Read it again. Evaluate your day. Be glad. Celebrate the moments when you're able to do it. And be thankful. That's immersing yourself in his teachings, spending time with them. Another thing we do to train ourselves is to train ourselves to be more aware of our own selves, aware of our attitudes. Because often when people ask us to do a favor for them, for instance, we automatically react, we impulsively react in a negative way. We might think, oh yeah, he's asking me for another favor. He's asked me for a lot of favors, and here's another one. Or we might think immediately in our minds, oh, I've got so much to do and so little time today. How can I do something for this person? We immediately might form prejudices about people or make assumptions about them or even feel jealousy or bitterness towards people when we immediately see them. We have to be more aware of our own feelings and be able to control them and put them aside to love unconditionally. A runner has to be aware of himself. He has to be aware of his body, how his body feels during a run, especially a long-distance run, and make adjustments in the way he runs, adjustments in his posture and his pace. And we have to do the same thing with our attitudes. We need to make adjustments, be aware enough of ourselves so that we're conscious of how we're thinking and responding to people so that we can make adjustments to know how to love them. And so when somebody asks us to go a mile with them or help them in some way, we're ready to respond yes and willing to go a second mile with them without worrying about other chores we have because we want to love. And this is actually what we're living for, to live in love. And then next, we train ourselves to be aware of others, to pay attention to people's needs. We talked about this a little bit last time, too, in discovering practice. A runner, of course, has to be aware of the other people who are running. Of course, he doesn't want to run into them. He doesn't want to get in their way. And he's also competing against them and needs to know where their progress is. But we're not competing against anybody. But we need to be aware of people around us because these are the ones, our neighbors, the ones whom we need to serve. You know, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, remember that before the Samaritan came by and saw the injured man, two other men had passed by, the Levite and the priest. They saw exactly what the Samaritan saw before the Samaritan saw the injured man. But when they saw the injured man, they passed by on the other side, ignoring his needs. They saw exactly what the Samaritan saw, but the Samaritan was moved by compassion to help the man. So apparently the priest and the Levite were able in some way to ignore the man's needs. They weren't aware of how deeply this man needed help, or they thought that their needs were more important in the moment. When the father saw his son come back, he needed to be aware in that moment of how his son was feeling, not how he felt. Many fathers might feel bitter as soon as they saw their son come, but he was aware of how his son felt and his need for compassion and forgiveness. And then the younger son would need to know and understand how his older brother was reacting and be aware of his older brother's feelings if he wanted to learn how to love his older brother, who was bitter and angry that his father had forgiven his younger brother. We need to be aware of our neighbors. This takes some practice. It takes some practice to notice their gestures, their tone of voice, their expressions, their posture. It takes practice to ask people questions about how they are and what they need and truly be interested and ready to serve, to be kind, to be forgiving, to be compassionate. So we train ourselves to be aware of other people instead of being so selfishly aware of our own needs. Next, we need to form a plan, Practice, training involves making a plan. That's what coaches do for runners. They form a plan of training for the runners so that they increase their abilities gradually. And even the runner, when he's contemplating a race, especially a race of long distance, he reviews the course many times. He thinks about how he wants to run in each segment of that course. He develops a plan, memorizes that plan, and then runs according to that plan. We need to do the same thing, because love is not always our immediate reaction to people. And if we form a plan and rehearse it beforehand, we'll be more ready and likely to love, to see practice, and follow it out when it actually happens. So we form a plan. What does that plan consist of? Well, we can think ahead of time. Who today do I want to go a second mile with? We already know that we're going to have opportunities. A lot of things that have happened to us, experiences we had with people around us, business associates, for instance, or people at school or in our neighborhood. We're going to have repeated moments with them. Things are going to happen again. And if they do, we should be prepared with a plan. We can think ahead of time. Who we'd like to practice this second mile with, and when we might want to do it, and what we are going to do when we practice the second mile. And we might even decide that before they ask us, we'll offer help. And that would truly be going the second mile and offering kindness that's unexpected. So plan ahead of time and then rehearse it in your mind. Think about it. The who, the what, and the when over again several times during the day. Think about who it might be, where it might be, so you can be ready. Remember, this is the way we live. This is what we do as disciples of Jesus, as children of the Father. It should occupy our thinking more than anything else. And then as runners, we need to persevere and not give up. Of course, runners have to persevere, because there's going to be many times in races, especially races of long distance, where runners will be ready to give up, or they'll get tired and they need to run through that tiredness. But if the goal, the prize, is meaningful enough and valuable enough, then they will find the determination and the desire deep within them to keep on running. Whatever adjustments they have to make, they make those adjustments so they can keep on running and finish the race, because the prize is so valuable. And our prize is most valuable. Going the second mile with people, each time we go the second mile, we draw closer to our Father. We become just a little bit more like Him. And our communion, our fellowship with Him, our intimacy with Him grows with each step we take to go to the second mile with people. Isn't that amazing? But that's what perseverance does. And that is the most valuable goal we can have, is to be close to the Father and allow Him to live in us and we live in Him. And then we can run, and run with passion. Runners have to run with passion. They have to love to run. Some people run long distances, and to run that long of distance, you have to love to run. You have to enjoy being out. You have to enjoy competing. You have to enjoy the training. You have to enjoy the accomplishment, the achievement of having run. You run with passion. As disciples, as children of God, we do the same thing. We're passionate about showing compassion, about showing mercy. We're passionate about forgiving people. We need to be passionate, train ourselves to be passionate, to be patient, and enjoy it. Paul describes what he calls in Romans chapter 14, verse 17, joy in the Spirit. This is a spiritual joy deep within us that we feel when we know we are doing exactly what our Father would want us to do, when we're loving exactly the way the Father would love. It brings us a deep, abiding joy in our spirits. And it puts that passion on fire and fills us with enthusiasm to love as the Father loves. It's never a chore, because it brings us closer to the Father every day. Then finally, celebrate. Don't forget to celebrate. A runner celebrates. especially when they finish the race and they win the prize. But runners can celebrate every day when they finish a good day of workout, a good day of practice. We can celebrate too. The early Christians celebrated often, and they celebrated by giving thanks to God every time they had opportunities to show His glory and His honor in their lives by loving as He loved. It united them together in their joy. We can celebrate too. Each time we go the second mile with somebody, for instance, we can remember that moment in the evening, give thanks for the moment, maybe even tell somebody about it, share it with somebody, not for the sake of boasting, but the sake of gratitude and celebration, so they can rejoice with us that we saw a moment and we utilized it to honor the Lord, to honor our Father by loving as He loves. Paul said, rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice, celebrate, because when you celebrate, then that moment that you practiced becomes a story that you remember and that confirms your perception of you as a child of God. You're living in His image. And it fortifies your enthusiasm to keep on loving as He loved. Training to love like the Father loves. We have a goal. We spend time with our trainer, Jesus, drinking in His teachings. We learn to be more aware of ourselves and our own attitudes that might block the showing of love. We train ourselves to become more aware of the needs of other people. Then we form a plan and decide who and what we'll do and when we'll do it, and then rehearse it in our minds and be ready to love. We persevere, not giving up, especially because if we give up loving unconditionally, that means we love conditionally, and we've given up the race, giving up living in love. So we have to persevere, run with passion to love, and celebrate. May God bless you.